Welcome to the UW Extension's online training program. My name is Tony Summers, and this presentation is part of the Mark Renz Lab. This video will demonstrate how to use the UW's interactive online weed identification key. The website is listed here on the first slide. It is important to note that when entering the website address, start with http:// not www. You can also find the website by searching UW Online Weed ID in a search engine, and it will be the first search result. Very few people can back up a claim that they know every plant that they come across, myself included. This tool is designed to help identify many common weedy species. It's important to note that both native and non-native plants are included as weeds, and finding a species in this database does not necessarily mean that these plants should be removed, depending on your management goals. Many times, identification of an unknown plant is very challenging, and this tool can be helpful. If you like solving puzzles or mysteries, this tool can be a lot of fun. The Online Weed ID tool is not a comprehensive identification database for the entire state of Wisconsin. Our state has over 600,000 plant species, and this database has around 350. For this reason, you may not find the plant you are attempting to identify, and further action may be required. If you are still unsure, you can bring a sample to your local extension office or garden center or other expert. You will most likely be interested in the plants in Wisconsin, but from the same website you can select plants of California or Colorado, and more states will likely be added in the future. The power of the online weed identification tool comes from its design, which is based on a simplified key design. An identification key works by asking a series of questions that narrows down the list of possible species with each subsequent question. After asking enough of these questions, any living organism in the world can be identified. The online weed identification tool is a much simpler version that will shorten the process, but may not include the species you are hoping to identify. The online weed key will ask a series of questions about the habitat where this weed was found. The choices will include agriculture, natural area, and urban. It is sometimes a good idea to leave this section blank, because if you find a weed growing where it's not normally found, you may eliminate the correct species. The key will also ask questions about general plant characteristics such as leaves, stems, and flowers. Using an identification key is as much an art form as it is a science. There can be a lot of variation within a species, and the individual plant that you encounter may be located on one end of the normal spectrum with regards to leaf size, growth form, or any number of other characteristics. If at all possible, look at several plants when answering questions in the field, or bring several samples back with you to look at during your online identification process. The online weed key will ask many questions about the plant you want to identify. It is a good idea to start by answering only a few that you are confident about and add more as you need to narrow down your search results. If you don't get any search results that match your unknown plant, you can try removing some of your answers from a few of the trait questions. It can also be possible that your plant is simply not in the online database. As you will learn as you become more familiar with the online weed tool, grasses can be quite challenging. This is because oftentimes the distinguishing characteristics on grasses are much smaller and more difficult to discern than for other plants. The online tool may be able to identify a grass species to genus, but not all the way to species. If this is the case, typing the genus into a search engine followed by the word key will usually allow you to get to the final species identification tool. It may be necessary to bring a sample to an expert. You also have the option to enter no information and browse the full list of weedy plants by alphabetical order. Now that we've covered the background, let's explore the online key in a little more detail. This is the home screen you will find if you type in http://weedid.wisc.edu/weedid.php. The search location in the upper right-hand corner here should default to Wisconsin, but it's a good idea to check the upper right corner of the screen to make sure. You will also need to select the type of weed you are seeking to identify from the pull-down menu of weed type. You must choose between broadleaf, grass-like, and woody weeds. You can see descriptions of these categories on the right side of the screen. There are many plants that are listed in more than one category. For example, first-year woody plants may appear to be broadleaf weeds, and you can get to these by selecting either. I would like to demonstrate this weed identification tool by taking us through the process together. Let's begin with the broadleaf plant in these pictures here. I've included pictures that show two types of leaves, the stems, flowers, and young fruiting structures. From this information and observations from the field, we should be able to identify this plant to species using the online weed identification tool. After you have selected broadleaf species, you will see the list of questions that are on the left-hand side of this slide here. I have filled out many more of the answers than you would need to identify this species, and I will demonstrate this later. For now, though, I want to go through these questions and explain what each means. You can see the question marks next to many of the questions on this image. You can click the question mark for an explanation of what each means. The first question is about where the weed was found. If the plant was not found in an agriculture field, you can leave that question blank, as I have done. The unknown plant was found in a natural area, so I have selected forest/woodland in the natural and grazed area category. I've selected upright for the growth form question because the other choices of prostrate, vining, or creeping with upright tips did not describe this species. I left the life cycle question blank because this would not be readily apparent from a photograph. This plant happens to be a biennial species, and you would have selected annual/biennial instead of perennial from the list if you knew this. This question can usually be answered by uprooting a plant, if possible, and looking at the root structure. Many times perennial plants will have large root structures. In fact, if you are unable to uproot the plant, it is most likely a perennial. Tendrils are absent. These are often found on vining plants, and they are the structures that help a vine grasp onto a surface that it is climbing. This plant does not have milky sap, and you can test this by pulling off a leaf or breaking a stem on a fresh plant. Plants with milky sap are immediately obvious when you do this. Leaf arrangement is alternate with this plant. This refers to whether leaves are found in pairs on the stems, with one leaf on each side of the stem. Even though the upper two leaves on this photo appear to be opposite each other, if you look further down the stem, you can see that others are not. If some leaves appear to be opposite and others are not, you would always choose alternate in an identification key. To answer the question about whether or not the leaf is simple, you first have to know what a simple and a compound leaf is. A simple leaf, like the one on our unknown plant, is one not divided into parts, known as leaflets. An example of a compound leaf are ash trees. Maple and oaks, on the other hand, are examples of simple leaves. Since we are dealing with a simple leafed plant, the next question is about whether or not our unknown has lobed or unlobed leaves. Lobing refers to major indentations in the leaf. An example of a lobed leaf is an oak leaf. This is one case where using plant keys can take on an art form. There can be some confusion over the exact amount of indentation that changes a leaf from being not lobed to lobed. Our leaf is not lobed, even though you see a very rapid narrowing or tapering near the end of the leaf tip. The next question on leaf margin is fairly straightforward for our unknown species here. You can see that I have selected toothed to lobed. Our sample here is very obviously toothed. The other option would be selected if the leaf edge was smooth. I haven't made a selection for petioles on the plant questionnaire because you might not be able to make out this selection from a photo that's listed here. Petioles are structures that appear where the leaf attaches to the stem, and when they are present, they are often important identification structures. You could tell from this photo if our plant had large petioles, but they can sometimes be subtle. In our case, our plant does not have petioles. Leaf hairs is a fairly straightforward question. It refers to whether the leaf surface is smooth or hairy. I didn't answer it for our species, but it would be smooth, as you might be able to see from this photo. Our plant also does not have spines or thorns as a leaf characteristic, which may be obvious from this photo. We have a plant with pinnate leaf venation, which refers to the pattern of indents on the leaf surface. You have the option to select parallel, pinnate, or palmately veined leaves. The difference between pinnately and palmately veined leaves is that pinnately veined leaves have a central main vein that smaller veins branch from. Palmately veined leaves have multiple main veins that originate at the junction of the leaf and the leaf stalk. A maple leaf would be an example of palmately veined leaves. These are the final questions in the online weed key. You would see these and the previous slides' questions on the same page when you visit the website. The next questions deal with stem and flower characteristics. Our unknown plant does not have square stems. Square stems are common in the mint family. Our plant does have leaves on flowering stems, which you can see in the photo here, and you can also see that we do not have spines or thorns on the stems. The flowers are white to cream colored and have radial symmetry. Radial symmetry means that you could draw multiple lines of symmetry through the flower structure. You can see from our 4 parted flowers that there are many ways you could cut them in half and get identical halves. The other type of symmetry is referred to as bilateral symmetry, and flowers with this type of symmetry have only one way to divide them evenly in half. And again, we do not have spines or thorns on the flowers. I have provided much more information than you would be likely required to enter when you use this online tool. So if I hit Search Database here, I should get very few results. You can see here that I got 5 results to choose from based on the information that I provided. Our unknown species is one of these 5. You can click on any of the images you see here to enlarge them. If you look at the bottom right of the screen, you can see that if you only included information about location, not lobed leaf, spines absent, and white flowers, you would get 14 search results. 14 results should be narrowed down enough to find your unknown plant, especially if you add life cycle, you would get down to only 7 plants. This supports the approach of starting with only a few characteristics at first and adding more to narrow down your search as you go. If you include too many characteristics, you risk answering one question wrong, and one wrong answer can exclude your plant from the entire search. Based on the answers to our questions, we narrowed down the search to 5 possible species. Looking at these pictures, I was able to identify the plant as garlic mustard. Now that you have the name of the species you are looking at, you can enter it into a search engine to find out anything you would like to know about it. It may not always be this easy, but it does get easier the more you use the tool. Grasses are the most challenging to identify, and you may need to enlist the help of an expert to identify some grasses. Let's walk through the grass ID key together to figure out what this unknown grass is. Some of this will look familiar to the broadleaf plant form. Other parts can be very different. This grass was found along the edge of a wetland and has an obvious upright growth habit. You can tell from attempting to uproot this grass and from its large structure that it is a perennial species. I left the plant hairs category blank, but you can see from this photo that you could have selected present. Fused sheath refers to where the grass leaves attach to the stalk. Grass leaves wrap around the stalk and then branch off to one side. The area where the leaf wraps around the stalk can be fully closed or partially open. A fully fused sheath would tear if you attempted to pull the leaf from the stem, where the partially fused sheath would allow you to pull the leaf from the stem for a portion of the leaf overlap area. This is somewhat difficult to describe, but there are some useful images if you search for fused leaf sheath in a search engine. Our grass has less than 50% fused sheath. The ligules are featured in this close-up image here, and you can see that they're hairy. Ligules are a structure that is sometimes found where the leaf blade connects with the leaf sheath. They are not present in every species of grass. If they're present, they can be smooth or hairy. I did not make a selection on the length of the ligules, but you could measure the length if you had a small ruler handy. Auricles are appendages on the leaf blade that extend from the side of the leaf collar where the blade meets the sheath. They are absent in our species, and if they were present, they could be viewed in this photo here. I included a photo of our unknown grass flowering in the previous slide. If you recall, they are large, feathery clusters of flowers. These are known as multiple branching panicles. Other options on the key are single-spiked or multiple spikes. I did not have a close-up picture of the seed heads to answer the final question about seed head awns. Awns are hair-like protrusions that extend beyond the seed of a grass. They can be firm to the point of causing injury if stepped on, or flimsy and hair-like. I left this selection blank because I was not able to answer it. Based on our selections, we were able to narrow the search down to 2 grasses, and ours is common reed, otherwise known as Phragmites. We could have narrowed down the search to 22 grasses by answering questions about the location, growth form, and life cycle, and down to 4 results by also including that the ligules were hairy. I also wanted to include a woody plant to round things out. You will notice that the woody plant key is very similar to the broadleaf plant key, and here is our unknown woody plant. You can see many of the stem, leaf, and flower characteristics that will be asked about in the questionnaire. You can see here the answers to the questions that I have filled out. The questions are the same as they were for a broadleaf plant, but you can see some of the answer choices are a little different. You can see that I have selected the upright with multiple trunks and stems category for growth form. Other than that, this is very similar to the first set of questions that we saw. The second half of the questionnaire is exactly the same as it was for the broadleaf category. Probably the most challenging question on this slide is that of flower symmetry. It will always be easier to answer this question if you have a physical sample of the plant in front of you. In this case, our plant has bilateral symmetry. Based on the information that I filled out, there is only one possible match for our unknown, and that is honeysuckle. This includes several species of bush honeysuckle. To get an identification to species, you would need to consult an expert or use a more detailed plant key. You could narrow down the search to a manageable 5 species by only answering questions about the location, leaf arrangement, life cycle, leaf margin, spine presence, and flower color. This tool can be very useful in identifying many common weedy species in Wisconsin. It includes both native and non-native weedy species. Based on your management goals, it may be important to learn more about your species after you identify it to determine whether it is actually a desirable species or not. We also have a feedback form, and you can help us to determine if the key is working and how we can improve it. Thank you for tuning in to this training video. I hope you found this both informational and useful. There are a number of more detailed plant keys in print form that you may wish to look into to supplement this online weed key.